My name is Kasper Johansen. I'm your usual philosopher. I came to London to find the philosopher Jeremy Bentham, and here he is on public display at the London University College. Why is Jeremy Bentham a mummy at the London University College? Why is he sitting there as a mummy? Jeremy Bentham died at the age of 84 years old. Jeremy Bentham asked it's in his will that his skeleton be preserved as what is called an auto-icon. His head on this auto-icon, his head is made out of wax. Actually, it's a wax head made by the artist Jacques Taleric, who was commissioned to make this wax head. What you see here is actually the remains of Jeremy Bentham, and his clothes that this skeleton wears is actually the clothes that Jeremy Bentham wore himself. So the skeleton is dressed with Jeremy Bentham's real clothes that he wore. It is believed that Jeremy Bentham originally intended that his head to be preserved and placed on top of this auto-icon, and in fact his mummified head, which is now stored at the UCL Institute of Archaeology. In fact, this mummified head, it shows evidence of having been attached to this auto-icon. However, very soon after it was made, this auto-icon, it was decided that the head was inappropriate for display, and a new wax head was commissioned by this Jacques Taleric, who made the wax head. The head was, however, kidnapped. According to a legend, it was kidnapped by students of King's College students in October 1975. It was returned unharmed following the payment of a ransom of £10. After this event, the head is now stored at the UCL Institute of Archaeology. Jeremy Bentham is the founding father of what we philosophers call utilitarianism. It's about utility, usefulness, and he had a very useful philosophy. More basically, utilitarianism is about pleasure. The idea goes back to hedonism, hedonia, from the philosophy of Epicurus. I actually made a video about this in a video about Epicurus. You can click on that video right now if you want to watch this before coming back to this one. You can click on that. Anyways, it's about seeking pleasure. That makes us feel good, that makes us have a well-being, we have a welfare. Utilitarianism means utility, what is useful. It's about maximizing the general welfare for most people involved. I'm going to read something from the book Understanding Ethics. According to the rule utilitarianism, we ought to act in accordance with a rule such that everyone were to abide by it, the sum of total welfare would be maximized. That's the general idea of utilitarianism, that you have to make sure as many people as possible feel good and have access to pleasure and well-being. So that's also a fundamental thing in our democracy, that that not just a few people could have a lot of money and a lot of pleasure with this money, but the welfare should be distributed to as much people as possible. So here's the idea of general welfare that you see in a modern democracy, that also you give money for the poor and the handicapped and so on, so you make sure there's a general welfare that has been maximized. So that's the idea of utilitarianism. It's very founded and grounded in many democratic society, especially in Europe countries like my country, Denmark. Ironically, Jeremy Bentham was actually afraid of ghosts. And this fear was installed by his family's servant when he was a child, and remained with him throughout his life. He was plagued by nightmares when he was sleeping alone. So in later life he always ensured that a servant slept in the bedroom with him. You can argue that he probably, from an intellectual point of view, probably didn't believe that there was such a thing as a ghost. But however, Jeremy Bentham supposedly recognized that this fear of ghosts that he had showed how strongly the imagination could operate on the mind. Just a funny bonus info on Jeremy Bentham. I personally think Jeremy Bentham was a great philosopher. I think there is a superficial interpretation of what this maximizing the general welfare means. It is often a critique also of utilitarianism, that it kind of majority rules, that a small minority can be pushed totally aside because, hey, we maximize the total welfare for a majority of people, so this minority, who gives a shit about them, actually. And that's a big critique of utilitarianism, that you find this, for instance, that most people in a certain country, like let's say Denmark, could also be German, it has a majority of white Christian people. So that means you can maximize the general welfare totality of the white Christian people, and that's enough, because a minority like Muslims, colored Muslims, you can push them aside. It's more important that you have maximized welfare for these white Christians. That is a superficial view of utilitarianism, although a critique, but that's not actually what Jeremy Bentham means. If you look closely at his philosophy, and I'm going to read you something from his a quotation from his one of his books. Be the community in question what it may, divide it into two unequal parts. Call one of them the majority, the other the minority. Lay out the account the feelings of the minority. Include in the account no feelings but those of the majority. The result you will find is that the aggregate stock of happiness of the community, loss, not profit, is the result of the operation. Very difficult to understand, but let me give you an interpretation of what I think this passage is about. The closer we can come to an approximated position of the happiness of all members of the community, the greater the aggregate of happiness, the totality of happiness. This was aggregate means that the totality of happiness. So that's my interpretation of this, and also I find that this is also what Jeremy Bentham actually really means, because in his later years of his philosophy he tries to include also the welfare of animals, because animals can feel pain and pleasure. This is obvious, what he thinks and also what I think, that animals feel pleasure and pain. So they should also be included as a minority group of this the totality. If you have to maximize the totality of the overall welfare, you have to approximate it more closely. This is very difficult, and that's why it's also we shouldn't have a shallow understanding of this utilitarianism, according to critiques of utilitarianism, because Jeremy Bentham is actually calling for inclusion of as much as possible to approximate this totality of welfare. So one shouldn't just say this is just for white Christians, the totality of their welfare. It should also exclude minority groups as Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, and so forth, because I would like to also read something from this book here. An action is right if and only if in a situation there was no alternative to which would have resulted in a larger sum of total welfare in the world. And that's the idea that if it doesn't really maximize as much welfare as possible as to as much people as possible, then it's not the right action. So if you can moderate an action, a political action, you can moderate it to include even more welfare for more people, like for instance minority groups like Muslims and Jews and Buddhists, then it's a better action and it's more utility, it's more useful from a utilitarian point. So you have to think about this and also include animals in this political act. Can we adjust the political act or law to also maximize welfare for the animals? It could also be for homosexuals and so on. So you fill in. So actually what is also happening, according to my views, and I think Jeremy Bentham, he rolls around in his grave thinking that modern democracy is also leaning now towards more exclusion of minority groups that doesn't fit in the totality of society. And that was what he was actually argumenting against. So the whole Trump thing about excluding Muslims, homosexuals and so on, that's not the way Jeremy Bentham defined democracy and what we should do. So he's like a ghost still sitting in this closet in London University College, judging us on what we're doing now in history with our democracy. So that's kind of my message with this video, that we should actually be more utilitarianists in our approach to modern democracy and laws and political actions. We should calculate for maximizing more welfare, not deteriorate and exclude and actually deflate welfare. So more utilitarianism let's do more utilitarianism. I'll see you hopefully in the next video. Bye. We leave Jeremy Bentham in peace to do his philosophy for all time and all eternity. My name is Kasper Johansen and I'm your YouTube philosopher. This video is about the infamous Diogenes and his philosophy and the impact of his peculiar worldview. Diogenes set the ultimate example of what a philosophy can teach us and what a genuine philosopher ought to be like. A human being devoted to the practice of what the Greek called parrhesia, which